bishop takes, and maybe now this knight sits in on the b4 square. That should be the plan here. Yes, he plays his knight to b4. And now if you were to take here, I would take it back with the bishop so that my e6 pawn is defended. But Hikaru goes rook b1. He's keeping the pieces on the board and he's trying to take and attack the b4 knight. Gukesh calmly brings his bishop and plays bishop c5. Rook c1 played, and you can see that a new threat has been created on the c5 bishop. So for example, if you are careless and if you play g5, bishop takes e6 followed by rook takes c5 could be dangerous. So first the knight comes back to c6, and interesting because if you take here, now there is check and I win with the knight and I defend my bishop. So that's the reason why Hikaru goes bishop c3. g5 is played on the board, just trying to create some kind of a clamp down on the king side with g4. Hikaru plays his bishop to b5, and maybe the most natural way to continue is check. King bishop takes, and we have the opposite colored bishop position. But Gukesh goes bishop a3. His point is, of course, that the rook is hanging, and after rook c2 played, now very careful because the a5 pawn is hanging and also the knight is hanging, and very importantly, if you had gone here, then I would have played bishop b4. So that's the reason why rook c2 played, check, bishop takes, rook takes, and now Hikaru finally enters in with his rook, and he tells Gukesh that I'm finally getting back my pawn on the h7 square. But Gukesh seems unperturbed. He's unfazed. He puts his king on f6, and after rook takes h7, so the material is even. But now this rook on d4 and the bishop can combine to put pressure on the f2 pawn, which is what he goes bishop b4, trying to enter the position with rook d2 check. Gukesh gets up and then goes back to the most important game there, trying to see what's going on there. Bishop d3 played. Hikaru maybe is in the best possible situation throughout the game that he has had. Material is even, but the position is so simplified that there is hardly any chance here. He plays e5, which is interesting because after this check, king g7, f5 pawn is hanging, but this is hanging. So let's say if I move my rook away, there's already e4 with a great position for black. So Hikaru plays f3, and Gukesh is very direct. He just pushes the pawn forward. He is playing this really well. He attacks the bishop. The bishop, after pawn takes pawn, pawn takes pawn. The bishop on d3 has to move away. But where exactly does it go? Hikaru plays his bishop to b5, which is a logical move, putting the bishop on a decent square. And Gukesh now goes bishop e7. Well, I guess it was possible to give this check, but after king e3, this pawn is not really hanging because the rook defends it. So that's the reason why he goes bishop e7, and you can see how Gukesh is busy watching the game of Fabi and Yan. Well, it's interesting because Gukesh has a lot of time on the clock. Also, the position is kind of equal. G takes h4. And now G takes h4 taken. White has an outside passed pawn. Black has a central passed pawn. And now rook to b4 played. You can see how Gukesh is very confident in this scenario. Like, there's not even a moment where you see that he's hesitating, where the enormity of the situation has got the better of him. Not really. It also shows that he's a big match player here. Now Gukesh plays his king to g7, opening up his bishop towards the h4 pawn, and his idea is to push the pawn on e3 and then capture it with his rook there. Well, Hikaru plays bishop d7, brings the bishop back, puts the bishop back on d7, slightly confused there, and finally plays it. Let's see what Gukesh's response is going to be, because Hikaru has attacked the a5 pawn. He goes rook d4. A very interesting move. His point is, if you take on a5, I'm going to take on d7. So the bishop goes to e8, still keeping the a4 pawn defended. And now Gukesh plays bishop d8. Nice move, defending the a5 pawn. I like how Gukesh is keeping everything together. And after rook f5, now we could take here on h4, but then there is rook takes a5. Well, Gukesh takes it. He takes the pawn on h4 and he tells Hikaru that you can go and snatch the pawn on a5. It doesn't really matter because we now both have one pawn each. What a exciting battle here by Gukesh. The game per se has been very solidly played by Gukesh, but also now that the result is coming closer, will it give him the title is the question. Rook a8 played. Well, Hikaru wants to push, 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 and then maybe get his rook out and make it into a queen. So Gukesh has to play this slightly carefully. He goes bishop g5, maybe with the idea of check, and then pushing the pawn forward, because then the bishop is controlling all these important squares along with the pawn. And now he goes bishop h5. Interesting. He's getting the bishop back into the game. And now what does Gukesh do? He gives a check. It's a good move because it forces the king onto the last rank. So he goes king f1. And maybe now Gukesh can put his rook behind the passed pawn. That's exactly what he has done. He's put his rook on a2. Well, the pawn pushes forward. a5 is on the board. And now Gukesh plays check. Maybe he'll give a few checks here. Like king e2 is met with check again. So he goes king g2. And now check, king goes back to f1. So Gukesh is kind of happy with the draw here, of course. But Hikaru checks his score sheet and says, maybe I have to keep trying because that's my only chance. I have to hope against hope, because a draw would mean that his chances of candidates are done. But a win is what he needs. And Gukesh is not allowing him to escape these checks. How is he going to escape it? Because if king e1, there is a check and you lose this pawn. So he goes king d1. And now Gukesh goes in with a check to the king with his rook. If king c1, I just simply move back, a check, and you lose the rook. And that's the reason why king e1 played. Rook comes to d5. And threatening bishop d2 check and winning this pawn. So king e2 played. And Gukesh can actually repeat now with check. I think he should do it. But Gukesh finds a very straightforward way to hold the game. It's a double attack. With this, he attacks this pawn on a5 and also the bishop on h5. Hikaru pushes his pawn to a6. Gukesh quickly comes back. He has 14 minutes left on the clock. Hikaru has 24 minutes. FIDE and Nepo's game is getting crazy. FIDE is winning actually. So Hikaru, now Gukesh takes the bishop on h5 with his rook. Very interesting, because if you were to play a7, then rook a5 back is the move. Oh, he's going to go a7, it seems. Yes, he plays it. a7 is on the board. Gukesh goes back. Now, if you take here, king takes d2, then after king g7, the position is drawn. So he goes check. Gukesh brings his king into the center of the board, and Hikaru now makes a queen. He makes a queen on the board, and Jan Nepomniachtchi comes back behind Gukesh to now realize that this game is an absolute draw, because now pawn comes to e3. Exactly, a rook versus bishop in itself is a draw. So here you even have an extra pawn as black as far as ahead on the third rank. So after rook a4 cutting the king off here, you will see that Gukesh just moves his king, and it's important not to touch the bishop, because now if the white king starts to get active along with the rook, then black just has e2 e1 in two moves. He's going to queen, so there's nothing much left here. King c5 played by Gukesh, and Hikaru, being the pragmatic player that he is, goes to rook e4 and now just takes the pawn. You can see Pragnananda in the background. Bishop takes, and it's the historic moment. The game ends in a draw.